Hello, students. Welcome to the second in our series of tutorial videos on poverty. And in this tutorial, we are going to be looking at measuring poverty. Now, if the first question that comes to your mind is why should poverty be measured, then I think you're on the right track. It's a good question and one that you should all have. No, there are several reasons why it's important to measure poverty. The first being that we need to understand the extent to which poverty is prevalent in a society. So you know how to treat it, you know what systems to put in place to address it as a government. The second reason why it's important to measure poverty is to identify areas of a population that are affected by it. So when you're putting systems in place to address it, you know what your target group or audience is. You also need to assess its impact on various aspects of life. So there are other aspects of life that poverty will affect for people. For example, health. How can poverty affect health? It can affect your access to health. So poor people probably aren't able to purchase certain medications or are not able to fund certain medical treatment. And as such, what should a government do to ensure that their health needs are taken care of? Likewise, education and other things. And the last reason we're going to look at for which poverty should be measured is that when we measure poverty, we're able to evaluate the effectiveness of interventions aimed at addressing it. So you don't just put any system in place to deal with the issue of poverty. Whatever systems you are implementing must factor in the extent to which poverty is prevalent, and that will help you to shape how your interventions are done. Now, there are several measures of poverty that we are going to be focusing on in this module, but the first one we're going to look at is the poverty line. And I start here because I think it is one of the most important, if not the most important or common measure. Now, the poverty line is the minimum amount of income or money that a person needs to survive in a given day. I'm going to repeat. It is the minimum amount or level of money or income that a person needs to survive daily. So let's say, for example, when you look on a Jamaican household, a person would need at least $250 to survive every day. If the person can source that $250 every day, they are living on the poverty line. If they cannot, they are living below the poverty line. And as a matter of fact, if they can do better, they're living above. But might I say, this $250 is what this person would need to meet their basic needs for a day. And remember your basic needs: food, shelter, clothing, water. So once you're able to meet that, if the minimum requirement you need to meet all of those needs daily is $250, then you are, and you have it, you're living on the poverty line. But if you don't, you're living below. And if you can do better, you're living above. So the poverty line is basically this established measure of the minimum amount of income that you need to survive or access your basic needs daily. Now, since we're finished with the poverty line, we now move to something called the poverty map. And I guess this one can be considered somewhat self explanatory. Now, the poverty map is a visual representation of the spatial distribution of poverty within a specific area. So, it would be the map of a country and it would outline areas that are affected by poverty. And why is this important? Well, I guess the poverty map is important given that it highlights for demographers areas. So whenever you're creating your plans as a government or whenever you're creating initiatives to address poverty, you have this visual representation to aid what parts of a country you should target. The third measure is the household expenditure per capita, called the HEPC, and the household expenditure per capita is also called the financial household financial consumption expenditure per capita, and it represents the average amount of goods and services consumed by individuals within a household. So this measure concerns what goods and services are consumed by a household, but how do you calculate this? You calculate it by dividing the total household consumption expenditure by the number of people that live in the household. So you'd calculate the amount of goods and services and then divide it by the amount of people who live in the household, right? And this is an economic indicator. All right. The next measure, which is the last measure that we are going to be looking at today, is the Human Development Index. And this is one that you should be familiar with because we would have looked at it in previous lessons in class. Now, the Human Development Index is basically a statistic that is used to rank countries based on three things. It looks on their healthcare, access to health or life expectancy. That's one. And that's a social indicator of development, remember. It looks on their access to education. That is another social indicator of development. And the last thing that it looks on is standard of living, which is both a social and economical indicator of development, which would make it socioeconomic. Now, why is it important that these three things are measured or used or are used as a measure for poverty? Healthcare, education, and how people live are important. One, it is notable that when we speak of wealth, it does not only concern money, it concerns our quality of life as well. And as such, when our quality of life is affected, we are somewhat poor in that regard, right? In fact, health is something that can make you poor. So let's say, for example, you're a millionaire and you are diagnosed with an illness that costs you millions to treat. Your money would literally bleed away in your medical expenses should you prioritize your medical expenses. And as such, health in the HDI is an measure of poverty in that your health determines your wealth, both financially and figuratively. Education. Now, we come to school and we hear every day education is the key to success. It's the root out of poverty for many people. When we were looking at chronic poverty, we saw that one of the reasons why poverty is passed down over generations is because some families don't prioritize education as a means of escaping poverty, and as such, uh, that chronic state of poverty is inherited over generations. So, now education becomes a very crucial part of the Human Development Index as it is assumed that an educated nation is not poor because people who are educated are employable, are working, and as such, that would reduce their susceptibility to poverty or the conditions of poverty. And you will learn more about this when we're looking at the categories of poor. The last thing is your standard of living or your income, which basically factors in the level at which you're able to live. If it's lavish or if it's simple. That takes us to the end of this tutorial We will pick up in another video.